Alright, I'd like to do a video about Christmas. It's the time of the year that there's lots of people making videos saying why we shouldn't celebrate Christmas because of the pagan origins, and then there's people on the other side arguing for Christmas, giving reasons for why we should, but mostly they're focusing on the argument about the paganism and the traditions of Christmas like that. And I'd like to take a step back from that argument and look at it from a different angle that I think is the most crucial thing that we need to think about in regards to Christmas. I'd like to start off by saying that something isn't Christian just because it claims to be Christian. And to extend that Christmas is not Christian simply because it claims that it is, that it's celebrating the birth of Jesus. What I would define that something needs to be like Jesus. It needs to align with what Jesus taught in order to be Christian. That's the definition that I would like to work with for what it would take something to be Christian. So I would like to take a step back from Christmas and all the pagan arguments and let's see if Christmas and the way that it's being celebrated, how does it align with what Jesus taught in regards to money, wealth, covetousness, possessions, and things like that. So what did Jesus teach? So Jesus taught that we are not to lay up treasures here on this earth. He was confronted by a man that came up to him and wanted him to tell his brother to divide the inheritance with him. And Jesus responded and said, who made me a judge over you? He said, take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life does not consist in the abundance of the things which he possesses. And he proceeded on and told a parable about a rich man, a rich person that had this very good harvest, and he began to build barns in order to hold all of the extra grain and things that he was accumulating from this very good harvest. And he had this thought that sounds very similar to retirement here today, is he said, I'll build these barns and I'll sit back and I'll live my life in luxury and I'll retire. I don't have to work anymore. And I'll just enjoy the things that God has blessed me with, is how many people of today would speak. But God came to him and said, fool, this night your soul is required of you. And then whose will those things be which you have provided? You see, God came to him and said, those aren't your possessions anymore. Now that you're dead, who gets to own those things? The statement is true that you can't take anything out of this world. Jesus went on and said, so is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. So he's saying that people that are treasuring up for themselves are fools. So instead of laying up treasure here on earth, Jesus taught us that we need to be laying up treasure in heaven. He said where moth cannot corrupt, where thieves cannot break in and steal. And he said that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Because Jesus taught that laying up stuff on earth and then laying up stuff in heaven they're at enmity with one another. You're either doing one or the other. He said that the eye is the lamp of the body, and what we have our eyes set on matters. He says if your eye is good, it's single, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is evil, your whole body will be full of darkness. And if the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? And he goes on and explains that he's talking about, look, what are you setting your eye on? On money. He said you cannot serve God and money. You'll either love one and hate the other, or you'll hold to the one and you'll despise the other. But he's making it very clear that you're either serving God or you're serving money. You're either laying up treasure here on this earth or you're laying up treasure in heaven. And he uses in other places that word evil eye as another word for greed, covetousness. And so it's very important that we are, according to Jesus, that we are seeking to lay up treasure in heaven and not here on this earth. And he's talking about being content with what you have, with just with food and clothing and the necessities. That's what Jesus is calling us to: simplicity, a simple life, just living for the basic needs, and then not storing up anything beyond that. Trusting God and relying on Him. If we need anything else, He will provide. And I'd like to go and talk about what the Apostle Paul said regarding this. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, Paul says that, "Now godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain that we can bring nothing out." He says, "Therefore with food and clothing, with these we should be content." But he said that those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many various lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. He said, "For the love of money is the root of all evil, which some having coveted after, they have erred from the faith, and have pierced themselves through with many sorrows." So, Paul obviously thought that riches and money was dangerous, causing people to err from the faith, depart from the faith. And so he's calling us into contentment with what we have, food and clothing. All right, so recapping, Jesus is teaching us not to lay up treasure here on earth, but to lay up treasure in heaven, and to be content with what we have. And he goes on and he tells us how we do lay up treasure in heaven. How do we do this? He says it's about giving alms, giving gifts to the needy. He says, "Do not fear, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell what you have and give gifts to the needy. Lay up for yourself treasure in heaven, where neither moth or thief cannot break in and steal, where moth cannot corrupt." He says, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So he's saying that we need to give to the needy. That's how we lay up treasure in heaven, is by doing good and showing mercy to others here in this life. That's how we lay up a firm foundation. And he also goes through and gives regulations throughout his teachings. He gives how we ought to give to the needy. One thing he says, Matthew 6, he says that we are not to sound a trumpet when we give, and that we're supposed to be doing our giving in secret before God and not giving before men. So he even says, when you give, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Really not even, I learned to believe that this is not even remembering that you've given. Really just putting it behind you, not keeping up a list of all the good things you've done, but just giving when God tells you. He tells us not to give hoping for anything in return. In Luke 6:33, he says, "What credit is that for you if you do good to those that do good to you?" Because he says even sinners do the same thing. So in the same way, in Luke 14, he says that, "Therefore when you make a feast, do not invite your friends and family, lest they invite you back over and repay you, and then you have no reward." But he says when you make a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, but you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. So those are some of the regulations Jesus gives on giving, and if we follow through with that, that's how we're laying up treasure in heaven. So I've gone through the basic teaching of what Jesus said regarding wealth, money, possessions, covetousness, and there's a lot more. I only covered probably half of the scriptures about this, but this is a basic idea. I'd like to take a step back now and compare this to what the tradition is with Christmas. How are people celebrating the birth of Jesus? And they're celebrating it with, this is the #1 commercial holiday. And, everybody knows that it's the time of the year when people are shopping and looking for stuff. And the idea sounds good. When I was growing up, people always told me that it was about giving. It's all about giving. But let's be honest with ourselves. Is Christmas about giving? Think about the way the children, your children, uh, are viewing Christmas. When they grow up, they don't have to get gifts, but they go to these family get-togethers, and everybody is showering them with stuff, with possessions. And we're training young children to desire the things of this world, training young children to be treasuring up the next best toy and trying to get all the things that they don't need. Are we really teaching children contentment with food and clothing when you're training them that once every year, or 2 times if you do birthdays, 2 times a year, you're going to be giving them stuff? It trains them to think that they're deserving these things, and it's going to develop selfishness. I remember coming into school and then, oh, what did you get for Christmas? And you begin to compare, and even though we received so much more than we ever deserved, we didn't deserve any of those presents. There was still a lack of contentment. I always wanted, like, oh man, so and so got this. It was even better than my toy. And that's the way it is you compare yourselves and desiring even better things than what you got, not being thankful for what you got, but wanting more. And that's covetousness. And Paul says that this is idolatry. And again, even adults are saying that this is about giving. It's about giving. But the thing is, it's really not. If both people know that they're just going to be giving a gift back, they come to each other and they say, what do you want for Christmas? And the other person says what they want. The other person, likewise says what they want. It's a fair trade. Both people could go out to the store and buy for themselves what they actually wanted, and it'd be the same thing. In reality, that's what Christmas is everybody is buying stuff for themselves because it's an equal exchange. There's no actual giving, because looking back through on what Jesus taught, he says that it's only a gift, it's only kindness and goodness if you don't get anything in return, if you're not giving hoping to receive. Likewise, in Christmas, people are labeling their presents. They're doing it to get recognition for what they got. They want people to know that I got them that, and even they're spending, many people, grandparents spending extra on their children and like wanting them to show how much they love them by how good of a present they are buying. And this is going against what Jesus taught, how giving is supposed to be. It's even if you said you're not doing it for that reason, there's no blessing in this type of giving. And people say that they celebrate Jesus' birth by giving and teaching people how to give, which seems like a good quality, but it's actually about getting. It's about getting things that we don't even need. That's another point I'd like to make is most people say, oh, I don't need anything. What do you want for Christmas then? What do you want? And this is sin. This is covetousness. It's here in America we have so much stuff. We don't need more stuff, but we continue to celebrate holidays to try to get more stuff that we don't need. So one last thing is it's teaching children, teaching all of us that good gifts are going to be of an earthly matter. Some earthly possession is a good gift, but God, Jesus didn't talk like that. Jesus said that it's your Father's desire to give good gifts to his children. So he said to ask, and you will receive. But he wasn't talking about presents here on earth. He was talking about his Holy Spirit, right? He wants us to desire spiritual things, his kingdom and his righteousness. That's what we ought to be seeking after. So I hope you can see that, just comparing Jesus' teaching with the way that people are practicing Christmas. And I'd like to finish this off and say, why does this matter? You could take a step back and say, so it's just a tradition of men. We're not really keeping this teaching of Jesus. I know this doesn't, it doesn't really promote what Jesus taught, but is it really that big of a deal? And I want to tell you, this is, if you're not listening, this is the point where I'd like anybody watching this to listen up. This does matter, because Jesus taught that if we love this present world, we will forfeit the next world. He said, what is a man advantaged if he gains the whole world but forfeits his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? He said, "For the Son of Man is coming in the glory of all his mighty angels, and he will render to everyone according to their works." He told a parable about the sheep and the goats in Matthew 25, which many people, might be familiar with, but he's saying those that didn't give to the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, or clothe the naked, or visit the sick and the imprisoned, he says that he's going to send those people to everlasting fire, eternal punishment, because they didn't do those things. And I'd imagine these people were probably distracted by lots of cares of this life, so much so that they weren't seeing those that were in need, and they weren't giving. And he also told the story to further his point about the judgment. He told a story about a rich man and a man named Lazarus. The rich man, ate really good food. He had an abundance of wealth, had a luxurious life. Outside of his door, he had Lazarus, who was a beggar, who desired to eat the crumbs from the table, who had sores on his body, and dogs were coming up and licking the sores. He had a miserable life here in this world. But the time came when they both passed away, and the rich man lifted up his eyes in Hades, being in torment, the Bible says in Luke 16, being in torment. And he looked up and he saw Lazarus being comforted in Abraham's bosom. He cried out to Abraham, just desiring a drop of water to cool his tongue. But Abraham responded with this, listen to what he says. "Remember that in your lifetime you received good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and you are tormented." You hear what he's saying? Because the rich man had a luxurious life in this life, and he didn't care for those that were receiving evil things in this world, he says there's going to be a reversal of roles. They're going to go to hell. They're going to be punished because they weren't helping, weren't giving, weren't showing mercy to those that needed it here in this life. Jesus taught that the amount that we give to others is the same that will be given back to us. That's why he's teaching us to be merciful, for God will then have mercy on us. So this is a life or death issue. What we do in this life matters. Jesus teaches us that we've got to be not laying up for ourselves things in this world, not desiring things of this world, but instead looking to store up treasure in heaven by finding those around us that are in need. And our neighbor is everywhere around the world. People that are dying every day from lack of food, malnutrition, disease, poverty. And it's our duty to go around and try to find these people and try to help. Not to be seeking how to store up an abundance of possessions here on this life. Because again, if we are storing up treasure in this life, we're forfeiting the next. Please think about these things in regard to Christmas. Because Jesus is no longer a baby. And he is going to come back one day, and he's going to judge everyone according to their works. So I encourage you, if this is the first time hearing stuff like this, go through and read the Gospel of Luke. The Gospel of Luke, you'll find many other accounts where Jesus is teaching us about how we're to react with, how we're to act with money and things like that. And so again, we're going to be judged according to what we do in this life. It matters. Pray and ask God for the good gift, which comes from heaven, from God, the Holy Spirit. Ask him to open up your eyes as you read through the Gospel of Luke to see these things. All right, God bless you guys.